Okay, good afternoon. This is the Daf Yomi for Shabbos. We're recording it on Friday afternoon. Shabbos Parshas Eikev 5783. Today's Daf Yomi is going to start on the top of 81a. And we'll start with the Mishnah that if a man writes, let's say he writes that he's going to divorce his wife, the Nimlach, and then he changes his mind. So he writes to divorce his wife, and then he changes his mind before he gives it to her. So Beis Shammai says that since he started writing the get, even if he would die at that point, he never would have divorced her. She's already disqualified from the kahuna because he wrote the get, even though he didn't give it to her. And we know that a woman who's divorced can't marry a Kohen. Once he writes it, even though he doesn't actually divorce her, they have the reach again. It smells like a get, and so therefore she can't. Under these circumstances, she's not allowed to marry a Kohen if she'd be widowed from him. Whereas Beis Hillel says, tonight Beis Hillel goes the opposite extreme. Says even if he had given her the get on it as a condition, for example, I'll give you the get if it rains sometime in the next month, tonight, and the condition wasn't upheld, which is even more than a get. He actually gave it to her more than the first scenario of Beis Shammai. She's not disqualified from marrying a Kohen. Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Menashe from Tvil. Tvil is a place I don't remember ever having Tvil in the Gemara before, but that doesn't say anything. He sent this message to Shmuel, Yolamdeinu Rabbeinu. He said, let our master, i.e. Shmuel, it's interesting that he calls Shmuel Rabbeinu, even though Shmuel is not a Rav, he never had smicha, but he says our master should teach us, Yatzalav kol ish ploni. Let's say there was a rumor that went out and said, ish ploni Kohen, and the rumor says that such and such a man who was a Kohen, kasav get li ishto. He wrote a get for his wife, v'yoshevas talchav u'mishamashto. Nevertheless, she's still living with him. Mahu, what will be the halacha under those circumstances? So Shmuel sent back to Rav Yosef, the son of Rav Menashe. He wrote back and said, Teitzei v'adavar tzarach b'dika. He says, yes, under those circumstances, she should go out and the matter needs investigation. Really, Rashi says it's the opposite. Really, it's what it's saying is, first you need to investigate, and then she should leave the marriage because of this rumor. So the Gemara says, Mahi. So the Gemara says, what is this investigation? If you want to say that the investigation is should we squash or quash if we're able to quiet down the rumor, and if we're able to cancel the rumor, then she doesn't have to leave the marriage. Maybe that's what we have to investigate, whether or not we could quash the rumor. But the place of Nardai is where Shmuel comes from. And we have a principle, if there was a rumor in Nardai, Shmuel would not cancel it in Nardai. He wouldn't cancel the rumor. And the judges of the city of Nardai did not have the practice of canceling the rumor because they were concerned that if you're not going to make these rumors, then you're going to be strengthening the sinners. Because we said we know elsewhere, we said this in the next chapter, in the 9th chapter, that it states that in Surah they used to cancel the rumors, but in Nardai they were afraid to cancel the rumors because then they worried that strengthening the space of the sinner. So in Nardai they wouldn't cancel the rumors. So what was Shmuel saying to investigate? Ella, what he was saying to investigate was whether or not Ikaru in a Sina Ksiva. It says the rumor is that he wrote a get for his wife. Does that mean he wrote it, or is the rumor that he gave it? That's what the rumor is. What do we call the word writing? Does writing mean giving? So the Gemara says, but even if we do call giving writing, meaning say even if sometimes writing can mean giving, But that shouldn't be enough to force her to leave the marriage, because ksiva gufa, milo karla ksiva. But writing itself is also called writing. So therefore, just the fact that it says writing doesn't mean that he gave her a get. It could also mean that he just wrote a get for her. The Gemara says, yes, that is the case. In the Imegalia Milsa, the Karl and Asina Tsiva, because if the matter becomes clear that they called giving, they called writing, refers also to giving, Dilma Nasing Ha'amri. And maybe we'd have to say that he really gave her the get, and so therefore Teitze. Therefore, she has to leave the marriage on the basis of the fact that he actually gave her the get. Maybe he actually said that he gave the get to his wife and not that he wrote the get. So the Gemara says, but why did she have to leave the marriage? When do we force people to leave on the basis of a rumor? Only if it's before they're married. We don't allow them to get married, but on the basis of a rumor, they've been married for many years, because there's a rumor that we're going to force her to leave the marriage. The Gemara says, didn't Rav Ashi say, if the rumor happens after they've been married for many years, we don't, or after they've been married, we don't have to be concerned about the rumor. So the Gemara says, no, what does Teitze mean? My Teitze, what does it mean? It means, my Teitze Nami, what does it mean? Teitze Misheni. When Shmuel says Teitze, it means that if she would go ahead and after her husband died, the first husband died, she married a second man, and the rumor comes out that the first man had actually already divorced her, then under those circumstances, we force her to leave the second marriage. Well, the Gemara says, well, shall Rishon. Well, then if you're saying that the first husband had divorced her, well, then you're spreading rumors about the children of the first marriage who she had, and we'll say that she had these children after she had already been divorced, and then they're no longer Kohanim, they're Chalolim. So the Gemara says, since we kick her out of the second marriage, but we didn't kick her out of the first marriage, then we're not going to invalidate the children, because people will say that he must have just divorced her right before he died. And we know that was a practice. There was a strong practice to divorce the people right before the husbands divorced their wives, right before they died, so that they wouldn't fall to chalitza or yibum. He says, come, I'll show you that the earlier generations are not like the later generations, meaning to say the Doros Harishonim, who were the earlier generations? Beis Shammai. Beis Shammai was the earlier generation. And what did we see Beis Shammai? And Beis Shammai says that if he just had in mind, if he just says, write a gift for my wife, but he didn't actually divorce her, we're going to disqualify from the kuna on that basis. Whereas the Doros Ha'achronim, but the later generations, was Rabbi Dosa. And he was much more lenient. The Tanya, Rabbi Dosa taught, we learned in the Brisa, or actually, we learned in the Brisa. What does the Brisa say? But there's hold on. But actually, it's not really a Brisa, but it's a mission adios. But this, which Rabbi Dosa said, it's an old Gersa. Is it Tanan or Tanya? But okay, fine. So we learned it's a mission adios also, but it's also a Brisa that Rabbi Dosa taught. Shivuya, let's say you have a captured woman, so the assumption was that she was assaulted, and so therefore you would think that she can no longer marry a Kohen, or any truma. But Rabbi Dosa says, "Ochelas petruma, divrei Rabbi Dosa." Rabbi Dosa still allowed her to eat the truma, even though she was the daughter of a Kohen and she was captured. So there's the probability that she was assaulted. He still allows her to eat from the truma. Why? Because he says there wasn't actual intercourse, she just engaged in, she was assaulted, and so therefore she wasn't disqualified from marrying from the kahuna. So we see that Beis Shammai was the earlier generation. He was so strict on the basis of reach haget, the smell of the get. He said she's disqualified from the kahuna, but Rabbi Dosa allowed it even in a circumstance where she was captured. I'll show you another example. That the earlier generations were much more severe than the later generations because the earlier generations, because Doris Harishonim, the earlier generations, machnisim perusein derech taraxamon. The only way you have to take a tithe on Truma Meiser is if it's permanent, but not if it's temporary. And how is it permanent? If you take the produce into your house through the main gate, but if you take it through the skylight, you don't have to pay this tithe to the Kohanim and the Levim. So he said here, the earlier generations, they used to bring their food through the gate because they wanted to be obligated to pay the Meiser. Whereas Doris HaAchronim, but the later generations, Machnisim Perusein Derech Gagos v'Derech Karpifos, they used to use this subterfuge. They would bring in their fruits via the rooftops and the backyards. They looked for loopholes to get out of Meiser. As Rabbi Yanai taught, the tevel, the untithed produce, is not going to be obligated in a tithe unless it sees the front of the house, i.e., unless it comes through the front of the house. And it says, "Biarti hakodesh min habayis." I got rid of the all my tithes from the house. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Afilu chotzer kovas." Even the courier would be enough to say you have to pay the tithe. It says, "V'achu b'sharecha v'saveyu," that you eat it in your gates and you're satisfied. So the earlier generations didn't try to use subterfuge to get out of paying their tithes, but the later generations did. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Sha'akol Ne'emet V'ro. So now we're up to the next Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Hamagarish es ishto, somebody divorced his wife, and afterwards, V'lana imo b'pundaki, afterwards he spends the night with her in an inn, in a hotel. We don't require, she doesn't require another get from the husband. If they still get sheni, they still says she requires the second get, and the Rashi tells us the Gemara is going to explain why. Amasai, when is this the case? When do we say this? Halacha. Bisman. When does Beisil say she requires a get sheni? Bisman shenisgarshu min anisuin. When they became divorced from full marriage. Then we're going to say that Beisil requires a get, because since they were accustomed to each other, we have to be concerned that they had bia again. But umodim beniskar shemana erison she'ena tzricha imenu get sheni ne'she'en libo gaspa. But they still admits that if she's being divorced from just the state of betrothal, meaning they never lived together, then he doesn't require her to get a second get, because since the husband was not accustomed to be with her, we don't have to be concerned that they were together. So Gemara says, Amar Rav bar bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan Machokas b'shira'ua shenevala. This dispute where Beis Shammai says she doesn't need a second get, and Beis Hillel says she does. That's a dispute where we actually saw we saw that they were together, that they had bia. Beis Shammai's on the position that since they had the bia, even though they had the bia, it was just for licentious purposes. It wasn't for the purpose of marriages. And as long as he didn't say, "I'm going to be with you for the purpose of betrothal," we don't assume that they were together for the purposes of betrothal. So Rabbi Yochanan says, "Machokas b'sharua shenevala." On the top of 81b, the Beis Shammai is in the position. Beis Shammai sabri adam osa bilaso bilasos. Beis Shammai is in the position that a person, even though we saw that they were together, he did his bia for the purposes of just licentious behavior, not for the purpose of marriage. Beis Hillel savri, no, if we saw that they were together, we have a concept. Person is not with another woman for his nus, it's for marriage. So that's where there's a dispute. But if we never actually saw that they were together, we didn't see them being having bia, then then everybody would say she doesn't require a second get because there's no evidence that they were together. The Gemara challenges this suggestion of Rabbi Bar Chana in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, because what does our Mishnah say? Tonight, our Mishnah says, the modim in this garsha when eris in chain it's and get sheni she libo gaspa that even Beis Hillel would admit that she doesn't need a second get if we saw her if she was just betrothed because he's not used to her. But if you're saying that the case is where we actually saw that they were together, what does it matter? He saw them together. Ella must be, so the Gemara says, that when Rabbi Yochanan interprets that our Mishnah is where we didn't see that they were together. But Rabbi Yochanan, the Amar, Ki Aitana, and Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the dispute between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is where that they saw that they were together. He's not explaining the machokas of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in our Mishnah, but he's explaining a different brisa. The Tanya Amar B'Shem Ben Elazar go nefku Beis Shammai Beis Hillel Ella al shalo ra'u shenivala she'ena truchay menu get sheni. He says, Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, Beis Shammai Beis Hillel are only arguing about a case where they did not see her that she was having bia. That they would both agree in that case that she doesn't require a second get. They're talking about a case where they actually saw her. Beis Shammai Omer, then in that case, Beis Shammai says that under that case, a person will make their bia like znus. This is how Rashi explained the Gemara from the very beginning, so it's easier for us to understand it. That Beis Shammai says that you'll engage in bia just for licentious purposes. Beis Hillel Omer ein adam osa biasos bia znus. And Beis Hillel says no, it was for the purpose of kiddushin. Umas nisin du kimda v'shalo ra'ua shenivala b'mai pligi. So the Gemara says in our Mishnah that says that they're talking about where we didn't see that they were engaged in bia. What's the logic of their dispute? If we didn't see that they were engaged, why does Beis Hillel say it's a problem? So the Gemara explains the ike ede yichud v'leike ede bia. So our Mishnah must be talking about a case where there's witnesses to the seclusion, but there's not witnesses to the actual act of intercourse. Beis Shammai says, Beis Shammai says, lo amrin hein ede yichud hein ede bia. Beis Shammai says we don't say that the Ede Yichud are the same as the Ede Bia, that the witnesses to the exclusion are the same as the witnesses to the Bia. Meaning to say, they're not the same things. And so since there's no witnesses to the Bia, even if he intended for Kedushin, she's not betrothed. Beis Hillel Savri, Amrin on Hein Ede Yichud, Hein Ede Bia. They're the same thing. If we have witnesses for Yichud, it's like we have witnesses for the Bia, and therefore he must have been with her for the purposes of Kedushin. Well, Modin, but Beis Hillel would agree with Beis Shammai shenisgarsha mina erisin she'ena tzricha menu get sheni. But Beis Hillel would say, I only say this where she's divorced from the nisuin, but if she's divorced from the erisin, from the betrothal, she wouldn't require a get sheni because the kimin de libo gospel will amrin and hein bia. Because since he's not used to her, we don't say that these are witnesses to the bia. So the Gemara says, "Mi amar Rabbi Yochanan hachi." Does Rabbi Yochanan really say like the brisa? That Beis Hillel admits that if we didn't see any bia, that she doesn't require a get from the second person. Rabbi Yochanan, halacha kastam Mishnah. Doesn't Rabbi Yochanan say the law is like the Mishnah, the anonymous Mishnah, which meaning to say that the law is like the Stam Mishnah, and Bishalo Ra'u Shenivala. We've established that our Mishnah is talking about a case where they didn't see that they were together. And so that's where Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are argument, where they didn't see her. So how can we say that Rabbi Yochanan argues with the Stam Mishnah and he holds like the Brisa who says that the dispute is where they saw that they were together? So the Gemara says, Amarayim nenu v'aliba de Rabbi Yochanan. The Amarayim are arguing about what does Rabbi Yochanan say. There are some who say that Rabbi Yochanan says the law is like the Stam Mishnah, but Rav Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that the dispute is where we saw that they had bia together. So he says that Rabbi Yochanan never says this, and so therefore it's possible that he rules like the Brisa. Okay, so now our next Mishnah is talking about a special get that the rabbis instituted, which is called a get mekushar. What's a get mekushar? There's a get pasha, which is a straight bill of divorce. Get mekushar is a folded over get. I think they did this for the benefit of the Kohanim, because since the Chachamim saw that the Kohanim were very quick to anger, They used to write a get. They used to write the get for their wife, and without waiting. And then once they divorced their wife, they regret it because they can't remarry her. And so therefore, the sages instituted that the Kohanim should divorce their wives. It's called a get mekusher, that they make a lot of folds in the get, and that delays the process, and therefore he's not going to quickly divorce his wife. So basically, the way they used to make this get mekusher is this: the sofer would take a piece of paper, he would write on it one line or two lines of the get, and then he would fold it over, and then he would sew it together on both sides, and then one witness would sign that on the outside, and then the sofer would write another line and fold it over and sew it together, and then another witness would come. And that's what he would do for all of the folds until he finished writing the get. That's called a get mekushar because it's connected with the sewing. So, but our Mishnah is discussing a case where he divorced his wife with this get mekushar, but the witnesses did not sign on all of these folds on the outside. So that's called a get kireach, a bald get, because it's mekurach, it's bald and it's missing witnesses, and so therefore the folds are greater than the witnesses. And now that we did that introduction, we go back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Kinasa, let's say a person marries her after she was divorced from her husband who was a Kohen, to get kireach. But he married her after she was divorced with the get kireach, meaning to say it was missing a signature on one of the folds. So therefore, in these circumstances, we're going to say, Teitze mizeh mizeh. She has to leave both marriages because she needs a get from both of them, because she shouldn't have remarried on the basis of this get kireach. We place all the penalties on her that we did on the previous staff. The Gemara says, get kireach hakol mashlim min alav. For a get kireach, anybody is kosher to sign one of these folds, because you only need two kosher witnesses. And these other folds are extra, so even a relative or a slave or a robber or somebody disqualified for witness could sign it. That's the position of Ben Nanas. Whereas Rabbi Akiva says, Rabbi Akiva says, listen, you can sign it if the only people who can sign it are a regular kosher witness or a relative who would be a kosher witness if we're not for the fact that he was your relative. Ve'ezu, now, as the Mishnah defines get kireach after the fact, ve'ezu get kireach. What is this bald get? Kol sheksharav merubim me'edav. That where you have more folds than witnesses. Now, some of the folds, they didn't have the signature signing it. Gemara says, my time of the get kireach. What's the reason why the get kireach is disqualified? Why don't you only need two witnesses? So why is the get kireach disqualified? So we say that because since the husband must have invited witnesses according to the number of folds there are, so the presumption is that when one of them didn't sign, it was disqualified because maybe the husband said to the witnesses, I want all of you to sign. And his intention was that the get will be kosher only if all of them sign. So therefore, for this reason, if it's a get kireach, we say it's a disqualified get. So Benana says everybody could sign a get kireach. Rabbi Akiva says only those relatives who are kosher in other circumstances. The Rabbi Akiva says a slave can't do it. So Rabbi Akiva, Evan, my time ago. Why can't a slave sign this get kireach? So the Gemara explains the atzul memer kosher edus, because he might come to say that the slave is kosher for a witness in other areas, and we know he's not. So the Gemara says, well, carve nami atzul memer kosher edus. Well, the relatives also, if they see the relatives sign this get, they'll see that he's also kosher for witnesses, for testimony in general. So the Gemara says, well, Evan hainu taima. No, the problem with a slave is they'll see signs of the get, they'll say, oh, he's a kosher Jew, and then they'll try to marry him, and they'll think he's a valid Jew. So the Gemara says, well, Gazlan the Bar Yosenu is kosher. Well, if that's the case, a robber, why can't a robber sign it? He is a kosher Jew, so why can't you marry it? Why can't he sign it? Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says specifically, or it's clear inference from the fact that he says a relative can do it, but not, which means a relative, yes, but not a robber. What's the reason why a slave can't do it? Because they might say, people might think he was freed. And so that's the reason why he can't sign it. Well, Gazlanami also a member tshuva of it. Well, the robber also won't we think that this robber repented, and so therefore, since he did tshuva, he can't sign the get. Gemara explains, and so if we allow him to sign the get, people think the robber repented, and that's a problem. So Gemara says, right. So Karov Ma'ikol Meimar. So that's the reason why the slave can't do it, and that's the reason why Rabbi Akiva says the robber can't do it. The robber, they'll think he repented, and the slave, they'll think he's free. But Karov Ma'ikol Meimar, Karov Kuliyama Yadei de Karfu. Everybody knows that he's a relative, and so therefore, Rabbi Akiva allowed the relative to sign the get Mekushar. So the Gemara says, Amar B'Zera, Amar Rabba Bar Shilti, Amar Rav Hamnuna Saba, Amar Rav Ada Bar Abba, Get Kireach, Sharav Shiva, Ve'edav Shisha. Or Shisha, Ve'edav Chamisha, Chamisha, Ve'edav Arba, Arba, Ve'edav Shlosha, Ad Kama Chokas Ben Nanas, or Rabbi Akiva. When is there a dispute between says Rabbi Zera, or says Rabba Bar Shilta? Now, when is there this in the name of Rav Hamnuna Saba? When is there a dispute between Bananas, who says that anybody could sign it, and Rabbi Akiva, who says, and Rabbi Akiva, who says that only somebody who's only a relative can sign it, but nobody else? So the Gemara says this dispute is only where you have 7 witnesses and 6-fold, or 6 witnesses and 5-folds. Excuse me, it's 7-fold and 6 witnesses, or 5-fold and 4 witnesses, or 4 folds and 3 witnesses. That's where there's a dispute. But where you have 3 folds and only 2 witnesses, everybody would say, even the Rabbi Akiva, even Bananas would say, only a relative could sign that. Because the Chacham said that by get Mekushar you need at least 3 witnesses, so that the Kohen has to search a little to find the 3 witnesses, and in the meantime he'll be appeased. And as a result of this, the 3rd witness can't be a disqualified witness. He has to be either a kosher or a relative. So wait 1 second. Since we're basically saying that all 3 by a get mekushar are like 2 by a regular get, so here too we shouldn't be allowed, the 3rd witness shouldn't be allowed to be a relative. It should have to be a kosher witness. So I don't understand this, says Rabbi Zera to Rabbi Bar Shilti. So Rabbi Bar Shilti responds, you're right, you're asking a very good question, because I had the same problem. He says, okay, fine, you're right, it's a good question, but the 3rd witness is not biblical, so we allowed it to be a relative. And since it's not biblical, we allowed it to be a relative. Indeed, we have a brayso that supports this, like Rav Ada Bar Abba, get Kireach, Kishar, Shima Ve'edav Shisha, Shisha Ve'edav Chamisha, let's see, 6-fold and 5 witnesses, etc. Chamisha Ve'edav Arba, Arba Ve'edav Shlosha, Ad Kama Chokas Bananas Rabbi Akiva. That's where they dispute. But Hishmo of Eved Bananas Omer Vlad Kosher. But if the slave signed it, Banana says kosher. Rabbi Akiva says Vlad Mamzer. Avol Ksharav Shlosha Ve'edav Shnaim. Let's say there are 3 folds and 2 witnesses. Everybody says, according to Bananas and Rabbi Akiva, the 3rd witness who comes to sign that has to be a relative. Even Bananas would say that. And Rabbi Yosef, Gemara says, brings a different gear. So Rabbi Yosef learns the position of Rabbi Zera, that he says, Rabbi Yosef Masni kosher, that the 3rd witness has to be not a relative, but kosher, even according to Bananas. Tanya Karov, Amar Papa Tani kosher. Change the gears from relative to kosher. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, bo ela eid echad Karov bovad. When under these circumstances where there's you have 2 folds, and they said that the 3rd witness, they said that's only 1 witness can be a relative of a tray, but 2 relatives low. Film also kiyume betray krovim v'chad kosher, because we're concerned that you might come to uphold the get with 2 relatives and 1 who's kosher. Meaning to say, maybe you'll come to uphold the get with the signature of 2 witnesses who are relatives and 1 is kosher. Meaning to say, let's say the people would challenge this get and say there's a problem with it. and the witnesses who signed on the get will not be in front of us to uphold the get. And then the witnesses will come before the court. There'll be witnesses from the marketplace, and they only recognize the two signatures who are relatives and one who is kosher, and they'll uphold the get on their on the basis of their testimony. And the court won't know that two of those witnesses are relatives, and they'll allow the get. And so therefore, we don't allow you to do the completion of the get with more than one relative, so that even if they uphold three signatures, at least two of them will be kosher witnesses. We can indeed infer this from our Mishnah, because the Tana who taught the Brisa, he taught those circumstances where Benan and Rabbi Akiva are arguing, and he skipped and he said only those circumstances where you have one signature, like 7 and 6, 6 and 5. Shema Mina, we see from here that they're only arguing about a case of one of the signatures being disqualified. Amar Abaye, Shema Mina, Hai Karov, Chasim. We see from here that when this relative comes to sign on a get makusha, he says he can sign wherever he wants. He could be the first, the middle, or the end. How do we learn this? From the fact that our Mishnah didn't say explicitly he has to sign in this specific place, we learn from here he can sign wherever he wants. And Shema Mina, we learn from here, from the fact that they don't establish a place, we call Tlasim Mikaiman, that the law is whichever three signatures they want to uphold, they can uphold. We don't need them to be connected. Because otherwise he would say make the relative sign wherever he wants, and that'll make it more kosher. So Rabbi Ami says he passes like bananas. Says you can even have the third person can even be a slave from the marketplace, and that would be sufficient, like Banana says. Okay, and now we have only one chapter left in Masechas Gittin, this beautiful Masechta. And we'll